When a think tank or a politician says to you, I want to increase the productivity and have a well-functioning economy, you should ask them, for whom? I was in a hospital in Copenhagen and can without a doubt say that these nurses saved my life. Every single pound I've earned since then is a function of what they've done. In the way that we quantify the public sector's value today, we don't see it like that. We see it as an expense. There comes this idea that the market is where value is created. It starts this idea that the public sector is a hindrance to wealth, a hindrance to happiness, a hindrance to welfare. This is not only a way of thinking about economics that is dominant on the right wing. Everyone thinks like this. No one within the system is really challenging what a good economy is.
Emma, this book that you've written here, this is about how to quantify care, right? The price of unpaid care work. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Can you explain it?
Yeah, sure. I think I end up a place where I say that quantifying it is impossible, and that's what we should really kind of accept, even though it's difficult for our sensibilities. But what I kind of show is that from the beginning of what we now call economics, care work has been kind of a constant Achilles heel, because economics has developed like a really rich language for factory production and products and buying and selling. But care work is very special in that it is based on relationships, on bodies and minds, on really long-term investments in people, all these types of things that don't lend themselves very well to quantification. And that in and of itself is not odious, but what happens is that the way we use economics today is that when something can't be quantified, its value is effectively set to zero in politics. Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening now with care, that both care in the home, what we call unpaid care, is perceived as, free time. You might as well be watching Netflix as, breastfeeding your child. But the same thing is happening with public services, such as doctors and nurses and teachers. It's seen as an expense or a cost. It is not perceived of as an investment. Mm-hmm. And I think that gives us some really skewed political decisions and some calculations that simply misrepresent reality.
But has that been a change? Because from the way that you talk about it in the book, you use a number of thinkers to essentially say that for all time, or at least since the 1700s, there's been this inability to quantify what is care because it doesn't fit into the sort of mechanical economics brain.
Right.
It doesn't quite fit.
Yeah.
So, what has changed during that trajectory, or is it similar?
I think there is I certainly trace a story that goes from the 1700s to now. I think but it has been a constant power struggle. And I think one of the really important things in the book is that I cite feminists from like the 1700s, the 1800s, the 1900s, who were hammering on about this point and saying, you're blind to this. And there was this kind of intermezzo from, you can say the 1930s till the 1970s, especially in Western Europe, where suddenly what we call maybe Keynesian economics or welfare state economics suddenly was in vogue. And there was much more a sense that the public sector was supporting the economy. Whereas now you'll much more often hear, that the public sector is a drag on the economy, or we need to make the public sector smaller in order to stimulate the economy. And I think this can be, it can turn you into a pessimist, but it can also turn you into an optimist in terms of economics, because it shows that, there are economic paradigms and we've had different ones. And the one that I'm describing pulls a lot of inspiration from the Enlightenment that I'm quite critical of, but has only been really influential since, mid-70s, beginning of the 80s.
Because this is a huge conversation at the moment. It's in the news pretty much every day about making the state smaller, or about cutting down on this bloated civil service that is sort of the root of all evil and is swallowing up all of our cash. And the argument that you make here is that it's not a desirable job to work in the public sector. It's not something that's aspirational. Is that fair to say as a summary? But it's a job that has to be there. Without it, society collapses.
I think certainly I say that it has low status for these historical reasons, and also because I think when something has low status, it is easy to, get it cheaply. I think if we had the truly quantifiable number for the value of nurses, I don't think they would accept the pay that they're currently getting. And I think kind of my set-off in the book is that in 2017, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness. And in 2019, I was hospitalized. I was really sick. I have ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune bowel illness. And I was in a hospital in Copenhagen and can without a doubt say that these nurses saved my life. Like, I would not be sitting here with you. Had it not been for them, I would not have written the book. So they, in a way, have facilitated every single pound I've earned since then is a function of what they've done. And I think this goes for, teachers, for daycarers. But in the way that we quantify the public sector's value today, we don't see it like that. We see it as an expense. And I think that is my main criticism, is that we don't see that when we're investing in a public sector, we are investing in human capability, in well-being, in societal community, in trust, in all these things that are incredibly essential to an economy. And right now, you're saying the word bloated, unproductive is another word that gets thrown around about the public sector. But the fact of the matter is that economics, as it stands right now, has really no accepted way of measuring productivity in the public sector. We don't know if it's unproductive or not. And I think there are these cultural narratives around the public sector that has a constant undercurrent of a sort of sexism, I would say. It is not competitive. It is not innovative, entrepreneurial. It is not, head to head. It is soft. It is women. It is all this. But in a way, I think you could say that the public sector is creating the most important resource for the entire economy, which is functioning labor power.
And women are emotional. Traditionally.
Exactly.
There's this great bit actually early on in the book where you're talking about male doctors replacing female midwives.
Yeah.
And this sort of, because women were seen to be overly patient when it came to a woman's body. They would wait for a baby to be born rather than intervening. And this was not seen as the, gosh, I'm laughing now because it sounded so horrible. Honestly, I was clenching reading it. These doctors intervening to almost drag a child out rather than waiting for nature and time to take its course. The two things, it seems extraordinarily incompatible.
I think this is a big kind of thread that goes all through the book, is that there has, since the Enlightenment and up until now, been a desire to make society perfectly mechanical. And of course, I understand this ambition. If society is mechanical, we can get rid of politics, we can get rid of strife and war, and we can just run it as a machine and be like, this is how we increase the efficiency, this is how we optimize the processes. Mm-hmm. But the thing with care is that it is not mechanical. You can give two people the same type of care and they'll respond completely differently. One child will learn to read in 2 hours, another will not learn to read in 3 years. And I think that's why care constantly gets caught in the crosshairs of political ambitions, of economical ambitions, because it takes time. It's slow. It needs investment. We're all very, very different. We're not an average human being. We all have these different bodies and minds, and we come with different resources. And there has been an ambition to create a society that's for, the average citizen. And the one thing that is characteristic about average citizens is that they don't exist. No one is an average. And that's why care becomes, like I said, an Achilles heel, because it's difficult, it's slippery, it's long term. And the example with the midwives is a perfect example, because these male midwives would come in and they knew a lot about medicine.
Are they male midwives? I overpromoted them to doctors.
Yeah.
That's my sexism.
At that point they were, yeah. And of course they'd learned a lot about the body, but they had really no way of relating emotionally to what a birth was. And as anyone who's given birth or witnessed one will know, giving birth is, of course, a bodily process, but it is also an emotional process. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is an ambition to be rid of emotions in politics. And I don't think that that is possible. And as the more you do that, the more you will get these institutions that are devoid of emotions, of care, of this sensitivity that care takes. And I think that that's where we're headed right now, and many people already are.
And then it becomes the preserve of the wealthy, because even what you're talking about there, about these male midwives who sort of, they want to speed up the process, right? And that's because almost in a mechanical sense, that they want to be able to quantify, like a birth should take X amount of time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen like that.
Never. And I think that's also, a big annoyance for, public planners of economics, is that care, you can never predict how much time care is going to take. Everyone has different needs. And I think that because we see care as an expense now, there is a constant drive to lessen it, the bloated public sector, all these types of things. And that's because we really have no language for what it is that care creates. And what is it that it makes possible? And so we have this kind of in the public debate, and I think that's really a lot of what I'm talking about. I don't necessarily propose policy, but I'm very interested in the language we speak about policy. So the cost of care, we have a very clear number, right? We'll say, okay, this school costs this, or this hospital costs this. So when we cut it, it looks like, oh, we saved a lot of money. But that's because we have no language for what it creates. So what happens kind of language-wise is that cutting care is seen as responsible, the hard decisions we're always hearing about. But investing in care is seen as, abstract, difficult, and risky. But the thing is, cutting care is extremely risky without knowing what the consequences will be. And I think that's what's happening in the care sector, both publicly and privately right now, is that we're constantly making the room for it much smaller. And we actually have very little grasp on what the long-term human consequences of that will be. And I think we're seeing now all over the Western world increased stress, loneliness, depression, people medicated for mental health issues. And these things are happening simultaneously with, extreme accumulation of wealth. And that's because we're constantly losing care, but it doesn't show up in any of the Excel sheets or calculations or models because it has no number or value.
But why is that? Is it because we definitely in the UK, we've got into this political cycle of, short-termism. We're like, what benefits can we quantify in the immediate future? I mean, is that a reason why we don't quantify the benefits of care? Or do you mean that it's actually just not possible to do it?
I think that's certainly a big part of it.
Right.
But I think in some ways I go a bit further than other people working in the care space, because I am skeptical of the entire idea of quantifying politics. I'm not only saying that, we have the tankers and those we can quantify, and then we have the carers and those we can't. I'm saying that even when we quantify the tankers or, the railway or all these things that are, hard infrastructure, they also have social consequences that come with them. They have community consequences, collective consequences that we're not factoring in. So an example could be you'll have a small city, and in this city there'll be a high street. And the high street has small local stores, but then suddenly, a big box shop opens up and all the stores in the high street closes. Conventional economics will tell you, this is great for the consumer. You get things cheaply and you can get everything in the same place. But the thing that we're not seeing is, what are we losing with this high street in terms of city identity, in terms of community, in terms of meeting one another, having solidarity with one another, empathizing and meeting the people you're living with. There's a huge value there. So even though you might get the stuff cheaper in the big box store, actually we've lost something that's very, very important. And I think it's not a coincidence that when people want to talk about why they are seeing, a depression in the economy, or why they're, not hopeful for the economy, you'll often see a picture of a closed high street. And that's not only because people can still buy what was in the high street. What is the sadness over the high street is the loss of community. And I think this is the thing these things that we're constantly missing, is that every political consequence has also immeasurable consequences.
I'm glad that you've brought up shopping locally, because you had a very interesting turn on the Adam Smith Institute.
Right.
You talked about the invisible hand and that the Adam Smith Institute, which is a think tank, a lot of their policy used to define a lot of conservative policy. It's not quite as influential as it was during that administration. But you were saying that institute. Actually, do you want to make the argument? Because, or I could paraphrase it terribly.
Sure, I'll go. I actually just coincidentally walked right past them today, and I took a selfie with their little sign on the masthead. But so I think one of the things that I'm trying to do in this book is actually rehabilitate Adam Smith. I think she's been very terribly misunderstood, and I have a soft spot for him. So we have this kind of, and maybe this is the most famous image in economic policy, the invisible hand. Mm-hmm. So this idea that if everyone looks out for their own self-interest, it'll raise all boats, kind of, you know? So if you think of money primarily and you go after your self-interest and I do the same, then we'll find an equilibrium where you get what you need and I get what I need, and we'll both be richer. Mm-hmm. And this is often attributed to Adam Smith. And the Adam Smith Institute, but also many others, attributes this opinion to him. But when you actually look closer at what Adam Smith said, he did not say that at all. The few places where he uses this term, and one of them is in The Wealth of Nations, where he writes and says, when a person, is buying a product, they will often prioritize buying locally. And that means that as an invisible hand, they will support local stores, even though it is not necessarily in their best interest, for example, if it's more expensive. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a perfect example of how, what we were talking about before, all the way through economic history, there has been reflections on what emotions mean, what loyalty, community, care means in the economy. But it seems when these conversations are entering into the political sphere, it kind of falls away. And this mechanical language of the perfect invisible hand that's making everybody so rich is kind of what is standing at the end. Mm-hmm. And I think that, of course, you can always mobilize an old economist who's very glorified and loved to support your argument. I'm doing the same thing right now. And it makes you seem stronger. But I think it's a misreading of Adam Smith to say that he was a market fundamentalist who believed that if everyone looked out for themselves, we would create a beautiful society where everyone was rich. But that's what many of us have been taught to believe.
It's interesting because you can see that, we've definitely seen it since the pandemic here in the UK. People have been much more interested in things like farmers markets or, buying local has sort of become a little sign that you might see in many stores. And it is more expensive to do it. But I suppose you have that gratification of I'm contributing to my local community. And you can't quantify that in a numbers sense.
Exactly. And I think that's what I mean when I say, every policy has a care consequence. Mm-hmm. So even if it's, jobs policy or it's stores policy or housing policy, everything has a knock-on effect on how people organize care. So if you make it cheap to have, for example, in Paris, the area of Marais, for example, in Paris, if you've been there, very lucky, it's a beautiful place. And it's famous for all these small stores. There'll be like one store that sells only socks and one store that sells cheese. And you're walking there like wondering, like, this is so cozy. Like, I love this place. Why is this so nice? Why don't I have this in Copenhagen, for example, where I live? And then I found out that actually these stores are being supported by the government of Paris because they want to, create a community. So they have extremely cheap rents, these stores. And that's because they're like, that community has value. And I think that's what I'm getting at with this book is that the idea that there is such a thing as neutral economic policy, where we're doing what is optimal, that is wrong. Mm-hmm. Every policy or economic decision has large consequences for how we organize life. And I think what I'm trying to do with my book is that for so long, people, especially in the care sector, but all of us have been served these economic calculations. Some consultant from McKinsey will come into the health ward where you're working and say, you need to fire 3 nurses because then we have saved, £1 million a year. And simply, they have had no language to answer back. As regular citizens, we have had no ammunition to challenge this contention or to contend what they're saying. And that's what I want to give people with my book, is to give them a possibility of saying, wait, how are you calculating this value? How are you getting this number? Because numbers can seem so authoritative. When you see, I think many of us, when we see a calculation or a graph, it's almost a little bit scary. And the numbers lie all the time. And we as citizens need the tools to be able to look through the numbers and say, what is really being said here? Is someone's interests being held over others? And that happens all the time. But, when ideology in politics is hidden in a graph or hidden in an algorithm, you can't see it. But that doesn't mean it's not there.
It's very interesting because before Labour took government, and in their manifesto, one of their pledges was to introduce the sort of community healthcare. And so they had identified things that you're talking about in this book, where they said that, if you bring in better mental health advocates, then you can get people back into work through more supportive means, rather than sort of just taking away their benefit payment. Things like they wanted to introduce, and I think they have actually rolled this out as of yesterday, toothbrushing for children. That's going to be taught in schools. It's all sort of like preventative healthcare. And at the time they were lambasted because their critics argued, well, what on earth is the cost benefit of this? This sounds like an extraordinary waste of money. And actually all of this can be done in the home. And I guess it distills your argument.
It really does. Those are the two positions. Those are the true two genders in society. Yes. That's one position, that's the other.
And now Labour have actually switched. Labour have now changed that path, which it's been disappointing. I imagine it might disappoint people who enjoy your book.
Yeah.
And they have announced actually this week that there's going to be significant cuts. And some of these cuts include cuts to welfare payments, cuts to personal allowance, which is if you have a disability, you might get a car, or you get a lift for your staircase. Things like that will be cut. What your argument is, or is what you're arguing, that the long-term effects of that are more detrimental than the savings that you make in the short term.
Yeah, for sure. I think looking at the cost-benefit analysis of of giving money to care on a year-to-year basis is near useless. So, for example, disability support is a perfect example. We've had this discussion in Denmark as well. And the past 10 years, there's been severe cuts, especially to older youths and adults with disabilities. And, this was touted, all over the newspapers. We're going to save X amount of millions of kroner on disability benefits. Turns out what really happened was that there was an extreme decrease in quality, and a lot of mothers stopped working. So
really?
The mothers, yes, we've had I think it's risen by more than 400% the amount of mothers who are on unpaid care, paid care to take care of their disabled children. Because of course, just because you remove care, the need for it doesn't disappear. It just gets covered somewhere else. So I think that's the kind of calculus you always have to make. First of all, will women just act as a buffer? And I have numbers on this, that after the austerity policies, after the great financial crash in 2008, the countries that cut the most public care saw extreme decreases in women's participation in the labor market, much less gender equality in the home, which is always bad for the economy. Of course, many, many women who lost income because they were working in the public sector. And it really takes time. And I think I am not a calculation of cuts to care that don't factor in the increase in unpaid care that will always come from that is a useless metric. It's not telling us at all what we need to know. And I think the same thing goes for the brushing of teeth. So the brushing of teeth all over Europe has become a huge issue because teeth has become a class issue. And we sometimes see teeth as kind of almost isolated from the whole body. But teeth are, contribute to heart health, to extreme pain, to stress, etc. And we have no number for what it really costs us every year that care is not being done. And I think this is the kind of mismatch of the cost-benefit analysis as a political tool, where the cost is very concrete, but the benefit is abstract. And I think that happens in the care conversation all the time, that the people who are against care can show us the cost and they show us this high number, but then obscured in the distance is, yeah, but what is this actually doing? And that's what we saw with the disability benefits in Denmark, that what disability benefits do is, first of all, it gives a worthy life for people who live with disability, which in and of itself, I would say, is a value, but that's just my political opinion. Mm-hmm. But what it did quite concretely, economically, is that it made possible women working who had disabled family members. And I think it's fine if you want women to take care of people unpaid instead of the state doing it, but don't think that no one is going to take care of these people. Somewhere in the economy, someone is going to do this work. And I think that is the calculus that is so often being left out.
But outside the bounds of the law, which is what you say in this book, right?
Exactly. So women, we say, what I write in the book is that women act as a buffer, right? So you'll do cuts to care. So, for example, something that we've seen in Denmark, and I'm assuming also is happening here, is that we've seen cuts to schools. So a lot of the special education offers that were on offer for, kids with autism, for example. Mm. So that'll get cut, and they'll just get, rammed into a class with all the kids who don't have a learning or cognitive disability. And it seems as if we saved a lot of money. But two things happen. First of all, there's a stressed out family that suddenly has to deal with a kid that is much, much more burdened, probably not getting what they need, often getting more sick. Mm. But we are also seeing a destabilizing of the student body because, there's a kid here who needs something very, very different. And I think the cost benefit of that, wow, we're saving so much money. But if you're looking long term at the real economy, and the real economy meaning how good are people at reading and writing? How happy are they? How healthy are they? In the real economy, we're getting poorer. So it looks like in what we call the nominal economy, which is all the numbers, it looks like everything is going well. But in the real economy, we're seeing a big loss. And I think this is the big paradox that's happening all over the Western world, is that the numbers many places look like they're going okay, we're getting richer, like there's some productivity, blah, blah. But we're constantly losing a lot. And what we're losing, it's not noted anywhere. So there's everyone's constantly running to cover these care holes. Mm. So we have a $20 billion hole, apparently. But what we also have is huge care holes that are being covered all the time and are very detrimental to a functioning and dynamic economy.
But which has been identified actually by some of the American right, like the sort of pro-natalist argument that is kind of bleeding actually into the UK narrative. As of recently, a few Conservative MPs have picked up the mantle.
Yeah, the fertility crisis. Yes,
great news. But what you're saying is that women will take up their roles again. Oh gosh, I hate phrasing it like this. They'll take up a role again in the home, rather than taking their job, because the social structure is not there anymore to facilitate them going to work and having children.
Right.
So this pro-natalist argument has identified that we're not having children, but they haven't quite pieced together the cause of that.
And they're trying to solve it with the culture war, right?
Right.
So instead of saying, okay, if we want women to work and to have children, then we must have a sustainable public care sector that makes them rest assured that when they're at work, their child will be well taken care of and it won't cost them an arm and a leg. But what the neoconservative movement is doing is kind of, endlessly hitting the cultural factor instead, right? And saying, women belong here. Women who do this are more beautiful. They are more worthy. They are more real women. Mm-hmm. But I think also as a feminist, I also will not fall into the track of not trying to understand some of these trad wives as well, because some of what they're saying is true. Like it is true that we have a society that gravely devalues time with the family, resting, taking care of children, that prioritizes paid work over unpaid work, that makes it more desirable for women to mimic men's lives. And I think that is actually a critique where we can find each other. And I think we should also sometimes perceive trad wives as people who are, fighting the market economy's extreme power over everyone's lives, but they're just fighting it on a very individual level. And as a feminist, of course, I'm always incredibly worried when women don't have their own income. Can they leave a violent situation? Those types of things. So I think what's happening right now is that on both the left and the right wing, the care crisis is being felt very concretely. The question we need to ask ourselves now is, what type of society do we want? Do we want a type of society where women are overworked and underpaid in the home and where they have much less economic agency? Or do we want a society where we socialize the responsibility of care? Because it's becoming clear to everyone across the political spectrum that the current situation is simply not sustainable. I think that sometimes we have a rhetoric when it comes to care work, which is that, women prioritize care. They're homo caring, and the men are homo economicus, who prioritize themselves and their own self-interest. And I think this is really a misreading of men. I think we should understand that this is really my experience from working with this for many years, is that many men, for them, their salaried work is care work. It is something that they're doing for their children. It is something they're doing for their families, to maybe give their kids a better life than they had. And I think when we talk about care work, we should be very careful to not only look at it as a burden for women, to not only say, okay, women should get the hell out of there and start living more like men, but saying, doing care work is also a tremendous gift. It is also what many people describe as the greatest joy of their lives. And if anything, we are in a huge care crisis for men and boys. Men and boys, I don't find that their lives seem to be that happy in the current structure either. And I think that's something that I really spend quite a bit of time on in the book, is we should not idealize men's lives. Rather, feminist economics is both fighting for the right to be rid of care, to realize yourself in the labor market, but it's also the fight to care and the right to have time to be with family and friends and relax. And I think that's the kind of the needle we need to thread in this discussion, is to ask ourselves, basically, what is wealth to us? What does it mean to be rich? And right now, richness will always be less care. And I think that is putting us in places psychologically and collectively where, it seems, I think for many people, both societally and individually, that things are really coming apart at the seams. There's a lot of suffering and panic and pain. And as long as we use an economic way of thinking where taking seriously people's well-being is not seen as an economic goal, we're going to be stranded where we are now. And there is a way out, but it means a reevaluation of what politics is and why we're doing what we're doing.
Because that's the sort of the antidote to the prevailing sort of social media trend that is being thrust at young men at the moment, which is wealth is hard cash,
right? Rather
than wealth being, a mixture of spending time with your family and having some free time.
Yeah, look at Andrew Tate. Does he look happy to you? I think the kind of neoconservative movement is doing such an injustice to young men. I can't even. It truly makes me want to cry, because they're just being led down a path that is just more of exactly what they're trying to escape, which is that you only have value if you perform being a man in a specific way. It's this alpha and beta and whatever. And I think for me, caring economy and feminist economics is exactly about building a society that has as its outset, everyone has equal value and has the right to care and be cared for. Mm-hmm. And I think so much of the kind of, radicalization, I think is not too much to say, that we're seeing of many young men is, for me, 100% an outgrowth of the care crisis, of them not fitting in anywhere, not feeling like, what's my space in the society? How will I be seen as a valuable person who has a place? And I think when you treat people like that, they will rebel and they will become panicked and look for places that they feel valuable. And that makes it then we can all be pulled towards movements that lead us astray. When people feel unworthy, they'll do anything to feel seen and valued and cared for.
Tell me why you think that they feel unworthy in light of this care crisis, because it's sort of, not that I don't disagree with you, but it almost potentially was straying into a Jordan Peterson argument, right? Which is that there were, that there's only X amount of jobs, and now that women are in the labour market, men have had their opportunities taken away from them, and that's why you only get half of your salary and you can't be the provider. And then I guess, ergo, you're not welcome in the home.
Yeah.
So you don't have a place there either. Therefore, you're marginalised.
I think I would go at it from a different angle, which is that I don't think it's women's fault that men don't feel worthy. I think we have structured a type of masculinity that is extremely dependent on your ability to provide for a family and to be successful in the labor market. And we have structured a labor market where that is extremely, extremely difficult, almost impossible. And I don't think that is women's fault. Women are out in the trenches as well, trying to make things, stick together. But I do think that feminism has been more successful in giving women a language to feel worthy in other ways. To feel worthy as mothers, as friends, as, beautiful even. There are all these areas where you can be successful as a woman in terms of identity. And I think that... I think we really, if we don't, within feminism, take seriously why people are getting radicalized, if we demonize those people, I think we're really in danger. And I think that for me, this book also, is also talking about how there has been a little bit sometimes of an unholy alliance between economics and feminism, which is that from the 60s onwards, we had a similar trajectory. We wanted women in the labor market. Mm-hmm. Feminists, of course, because we wanted women to have their own money. We still do. And economists, because we want to increase productivity. And I think that has led to feminism sometimes distancing itself from things that were traditionally feminized. And it has also made it difficult for men to idealize what was traditionally feminized. Because it was like, okay, women don't even want to be in the home. Like, why should I be in the home? And
That's
I think
interesting.
Yeah, so no one wants to be there. Literally, no one wants to be a nurse. No one, is idealizing or celebrating the nurses. And I think that has really been has led us astray in many ways. Because now we're in a situation where really no gender is really that happy. And I think that is a care crisis outgrowth, also in a very concrete way. I have a statistic in the book, like a large overview of I think it's 120 countries that shows that cuts to public sector care increases political radicalization. Like, quite simply, there is a connection between not feeling cared for by your society, not feeling valued as a citizen, and being politically radicalized. So when you're investing in care, you're also investing in social cohesion, in democracy, because people need to feel valued. And if they don't, there's hell to pay.
So there's this sort of, so if we're looking ahead, at UK politics, we've got the rise of hard right party reform.
Right.
And you could make an argument that perhaps that is in reaction to the Labour government. They're not cutting back on things that they promised they would fund. I suppose on a wider scale, you look at America and you look at the sort of...
Italy, Germany. Yeah. Like, I think this movement is happening all over the world. And I think what I'm showing in this book is that what happens in the 70s and 80s is that one way of looking at the economy becomes very hegemonic or dominant. This is what I call established economics, that there comes this idea that the market is where value is created. Mm-hmm. It's what's called general equilibrium theory. And there is, it starts this idea that the public sector is a hindrance to wealth, a hindrance to happiness, a hindrance to welfare, ironically enough. And what I show is that this is not only a way of thinking about economics that is dominant on the right wing. Everyone thinks like this. And I think what's happened, and I think one of the reasons that the center parties, Labour and Tories, same in Germany, same in Denmark, they seem so similar. They seem to be doing all the same thing, is because they're looking at economics in the same way. No one within the system is really challenging what a good economy is. And I think for a long time, we've been told, if we just have a good economy, then everything will lift. And I think what I'm trying with this book is that when a think tank or a politician says to you, I want to increase the productivity and have a well-functioning economy, you should ask them, for whom? Like, what does that entail for you? What is a good economy? Because there are 1,000 ways an economy can look that are sustainable and that are, well-functioning. And we've been told there's only one. And we've been trying that strategy now for 30 years, 50, 40 years. And it's not only, Thatcher, Reagan, neoliberalism. It is also something a way of looking at economics that's been dominant at universities, in the press. And I think my background is cultural analysis. And what I'm doing in this book is showing how a culture has been built around economics, which has made it out as if it was physics or chemistry. And it's not. It's always inflicted with culture and history and tradition and hierarchy and all these types of things. And we need as citizens, I think we need the power and knowledge to sift through these arguments and see them for what they really are.
Mm-hmm.